we're going to go a bit left field now, gentlemen. We're going to talk about experimental processes. Now, I have to suspend my disbelief here a little bit because I'm a kind of reactionary Luddite, and less is more with me and keeping it real. So I have to sort of test every innovation to destruction. And I remember having a discussion with a sommelier who said to me that orange wines, where there's been a lot of contact with skin in fermentation, are wines for people that really don't like wine. Now, he was a bit tongue in cheek there because he had some on the list. But I think he was saying that novelty for its own sake is not necessarily a good thing if it interferes with the information from the ground coming into the cup. And if you, lace your coffee with anaerobic fermentations and you introduce whiskey barrels with sherry tones, are you really getting the coffee? Are you going to get Yemeni coffee? Are you blunting your experience just for the sake of some bells and whistles and marketing gimmicks? So I'm gonna start with Alan here because he looks like a guy who's keeping it real himself.
Yeah, this is again a very complex question, isn't it? We cannot really go black or white here. I think it's very important to experiment. This is a way of going forward, and this is a way of finding new products or new possibilities, if you want. So to a certain extent, yeah, it is important to experiment. Obviously, there is the other question: when should we stop pushing boundaries? Are we changing the final product into something else? And yeah, this is a question of rather morality, if you want. Are we honest with the end consumer? Is that actually the coffee itself, and he's going to pay a price for what it is or for what we added in there? It's if a consumer wants to add his own cinnamon in his cup of coffee, that's fine. But if I'm forcing him to drink a coffee in which I added cinnamon and then I call it something else, that might be a completely different story, right? So it is a bit of a complex question, and obviously the answers require a bit of debate. Yes, I think that it's very important to experiment, and I think always important to think of new ways of achieving a more complex or a better product, if you can achieve a better product, but obviously without altering completely the identity of the product that you want to produce at the end. So I think that innovation it's required, and experimenting in coffee processing is very important as well, because obviously brings whole new experiences to the end consumer. But obviously there are some boundaries in the sense that people want to experience coffee, not coffee with something else. So in my opinion, I think it would be a good thing to try some, I don't know, lactic fermented coffee or some carbonic macerated Yemeni, definitely, but with the mention that it should be just coffee in those tanks and nothing else. This is just me, and this is my personal view on it. Yeah, definitely.
Marty, we talked about the Asian palate with its preference for tea-like, almost vinous characteristics, maybe with an umami also as part of the flavor spectrum in the kitchen. They don't have the baggage that we in the Western world, perhaps even in the Arabic world, have about coffee. It's part of our family DNA to have coffee in the morning. We see it as a sort of social lubricant. But for the Asian palate, of course, they're new to it, pretty much. Most people have maybe 10, 15 years, and parents who wouldn't be seen dead drinking it. Yet we see some experimental coffees making very, very high prices at auction, being lauded by the cognoscenti as groundbreaking, creating quite a lot of noise and enthusiasm. So it wouldn't be fair for me to dictate to what goes on in another market with a different set of expectations. So from your perspective in Asia, where do you think these experimental processes are going, and where would it be appropriate for Yemeni beans to be subjected to some of these techniques?
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right. The market here is so open-minded to trying anything, and I think some of that comes from just the variety of foods and flavors that exist in daily consumption anyway, and then also exactly because people don't have a structure in their mind of what coffee is supposed to taste like. So a lot of the specialty naturals revolution really took off when it came to Asia. There was so much resistance in these older, more established coffee markets against naturals at all, without talking about anything with CO2, anything with additives, anything anaerobic, just normal, influenced. A lot of times they say controlled fermentation, but we can't control fermentation. We can only influence it. But even these just normal naturals didn't really find a home in a lot of Western markets until they were already very much established as part of the framework of the Asian specialty coffee world. And so some of these newer things that taste like seaweed and lobster tails and soy sauce, they're not my personal preference. I do not enjoy drinking them. I sometimes enjoy cupping them just because I'm just shocked at how a coffee can have this taste. But they're definitely a growing part of the market, and there's always, I don't think it's going to go away. This year we got so many crazy high fermentation Ethiopian samples that were not my preference. I felt that the degree, even though I'm very much in favor of experimenting and trying new things and finding ways to increase value for producers, I think they did in many ways kind of lose the uniqueness of Ethiopian coffee. And these coffees often, whether they're from Brazil or from Ethiopia, or from Indonesia, or from Yemen, they all end up tasting more a byproduct of overgrown fermentation than of what they may have had to begin with. Now, should it be done or not? Will I drink it? Probably not. Will I be opposed to it if it's a way that gives farmers and producers the opportunity to continue producing coffee? Then no, I will not be opposed. I think we need to do, as far as people that are connecting markets to regions, we need to find whatever product will connect to whatever market. But as Alan said, within the realm of transparency and integrity, I'm not even opposed to adding cinnamon as long as you say, I added cinnamon here. Now, I'm opposed to buying it and I'm opposed to selling it personally, and our company won't buy and sell coffee with flavor additives of any kind, but I'm not opposed to them, even if they're commercial, coloring and flavoring additives, as long as there's transparency and honesty about what happened. We sell vanilla lattes, and that's very much a flavor additive, but we don't tell people this coffee's really vanilla-y, you'll enjoy it. We just tell them the truth, and if they want to drink it, that's their prerogative. So what I would love to see is, before we get into crazy things in Yemen, figuring out, can we make really amazing, really unique, really clean, wild and crazy naturals based on what Yemeni coffee already has to offer? And will that be enough financial incentive for producers to continue to do that year on year, and to avoid defects and to continue to develop flavor profile through influenced fermentation? That would be my personal wish and preference. But you won't see me standing in the way of a producer trying to get their product to market, as long as transparency and integrity is a part of the recipe.
Thank you. And John, I mean, transparency, integrity, carrying the information from the soil with as little intervention as possible, so that people get an authentic experience. That's, you know, what human beings have hardwired in our olfactory sense. We want to differentiate. And one of the difficulties for Yemen is that Yemeni coffee isn't well known or understood, and we want to get that message across for what it is, rather than introduce something on top of that that kind of smudges the message before you've got beyond the gain line of people buying into the quality and the uniqueness. So there's a bit of a tension there, I think, with too much experimentation too early in the game for a source which is not properly understood yet. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that point.
Yeah, I thought Marty's point was really good there as well. You know, just can Yemeni coffee find a place for itself, sort of in the marketplace, and can people understand it for what it is with really good, clean processing before adding in these additional kind of processes? And partly as well, you know, sort of, you know, the burden of risk always goes to the producer in this as well. You know, there's a risk associated. People are still, it's through this process of experimentation that Alan was talking about, we're still understanding what are the ways that we can sort of not necessarily control, but understand what's happening in terms of some of these fermentations. So there is a high level of risk of them going wrong. There's an added cost in preparing them, and there's an added cost in their production as well. So, and is that what kind of the producer wants? You know, I think sometimes the industry sits in the middle, and the two people they forget, or kind of the sort of the import and sort of roasting operations, we sit in the middle, and we're passing out dictates, and we don't listen to what the consumer is saying. I really like this. And we're not listening to saying the producer saying, well, I'm willing to take the risk to make this. You know, we can be a conduit and say, we found this interesting coffee. Here's the producer. Do you like it? And is this something that meets your flavor profile? In kind of maybe kind of slightly older consuming markets like sort of Northern Europe, they are quite wacky, interesting flavor profiles, and there are only certain demographics that can get a handle on this. I know that if I gave my parents sort of a 96-hour fermented coffee, they wouldn't know what to do with it. And then there are a lot of people who are kind of on that journey as well. So it's difficult because Yemen doesn't sit in a bubble, and that its coffee has to stand alongside all of these kind of other producing nations where farmers have been able to get added value coffee for 20 years. They've got a bit more financial stability. They've got repeat buyers, whether they be roasters or sort of import operations, where they can take a bit of financial risk and put a stainless steel fermentation tank in place and put that through and make that test, because they know they've got an order book for some of their more traditional processes as well. And I think sort of that's really hard now. How does the Yemeni farmer fit in with that? How does a Yemeni export operation try to get that message across while all of this is happening as well? And yeah, and as I said, you know, I think, you know, like I think if the producer's happy what they're doing and the consumer's really happy with the product as is, why not just let that kind of work out for a couple of years and then see where the experimentation may go, and not necessarily do an experimentation because another country's doing it, but experiment because of the desire to do that from the individual at the producer level.
Very clear, fascinating stuff. So we're coming to the final question, and we're trying to sort of scope forward a bit of a route map for Yemen. And you three guys have seen the specialty coffee industry evolve. New players come to the game. Some fashionable coffees, improvements in production, identification of varietals, mapping. just to throw it out there to you three guys, if you had a wish list of what the industry as a whole would seek, given the limitations that Yemen has with its topography, its fragile logistics at the moment, the remoteness of some of the coffee producers, the micro scale of artisanal production